Morning, everyone. My name is Larry Johnson, and I am the program lead advisor at the El Camino College Small Business Development Center, and also involved with El Camino College in our program to work with the restaurant industry. And I have with me probably five of the most amazing restaurant industry professionals in our area. Jonathan Fry, who has 35 years experience in the food industry and research, product development, consumer intelligence, consumer testing, uh, which includes 15 years as operations intelligence director at Taco Bell. We also have David Kuo, who's the founder, chef, and owner of Little Fatties and the Accomplice Bar. David has an amazing uh, catering service and also a cloud kitchen operation, doing quite well even in this post-COVID environment. Deborah Numofsky, who's our resident commercial real estate professional, consummate professional, intimately involved in commercial real estate in our region since 2011. Hunter Hall, who is the former executive director of Main Street Business Improvement District in Santa Monica, and is currently involved with the city of Santa Monica on an ambitious plan to allow restaurants and retailers to occupy over a mile and a half of the Main Street district with outdoor dining. And then finally, we're honored to have Jason Berkowitz here, who's a hospitality veteran whose career spans over 40 restaurant openings, and he has founded something called Arrow Up, which is a stylized safety, service, and compliance training program for restaurants looking to build safer and stronger teams. So this collection of individuals will be our panel, and we'll start off with opening comments from Jonathan.
Okay, well, obviously we're in a, a little bit of a different environment than we're normally used to, and I think just looking at the various areas around the state and around the area, certain cities and municipalities have solved this in their own unique ways. Being down in the South Bay, South Redondo Beach, they've really leveraged these little parquettes, the outdoor dining areas, and that seems to just have really reignited dining in the South Bay. And I was just up in Northern California last week, and they're doing a similar thing. They don't have quite the number of cases that we have down here, but you know, the outdoor dining up there it's been spectacular, and it's been really a powerful thing, bringing a lot of people together safely, distancing. But it's been a real boon to the restaurants that are doing
it. David Kuo.
You're on mute.
Thanks for having me on. My name is David Coe. I own Little Fatty and Accomplice Bar in Mar Vista, and just trying to navigate these times just like any other restaurant owner, just learning how to be flexible and looking for different opportunities. I look forward to sharing them with you during this conversation.
Deborah. Thanks, David.
Hi, Deborah Namatsky, RPM Commercial out of El Segundo. I've been working with a lot of restaurants over the past few years, helping them expand. One of the challenges right now is obviously there are a lot of people that are facing the inability to pay their rent. And I do think there might be creative ways to try to approach landlords that are approachable, unlike what we were talking about with Hunter earlier, maybe the people who own property for a long time. It doesn't matter about leasing the space. But there are a lot of landlords in the same boat as the restaurateurs out there struggling, because there are a lot of, very statewide mandates not allowing you to evict, having landlords carry the burden of what's going on in the economy. So I think there is a way you can approach talking to landlords and figuring out how there's a way we can work together to get through this. Obviously, in a lot of ways, both the restaurateurs and the landlords are in the same boat. They're trying to struggle to survive under all of this change and all of this mandate that's given to them. And I think finding ways to have conversations with landlords to say, what can we do to make this work together, can go a long way into helping both sides keep a relationship and, you know, actually keep both of them trying to survive this crisis right now.
Thanks, Deborah. Hunter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Hunter Hall. I'm still the executive director of one of the bids in Main Street, actually. So I do like 19 things. I'm a restaurant professional, restaurant consultant. I pivoted to more civic stuff recently. So I took over a business improvement district in Santa Monica, and I was kind of one of the first people to advocate for in-street dining. So I worked with the city of Santa Monica in designing its current Main Street alfresco program. So if you go to mainstreetsm.com, I'll put a link in the chat. You can kind of see some idea of what that looks like. I'm also an active lobbyist. I work with the California Restaurant Association, and I'm also a member of the new Independent Hospitality Coalition. So we're advocating for local and statewide and national reform for independent restaurants in particular. And, you know, I'm just trying to help everybody navigate this brave new world that we're in. And, you know, I'd like to kick it over to Jason to explain what he's doing on that front as well. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, everybody. Happy to be here. Longtime operator, and as introduced, building training and compliance tools online. I'm going to kind of jump into some meat on the bone, things that I think is really key to focus on at this time, and divided up into sort of 6 factors, but the bookends are just to really show that you care. That's really what people want to see, and ourselves as we're out there and walking in. We just want to see the attention into care. And so approach safety as the ultimate form of hospitality, I think, is absolutely huge. It is, right? It's how you feel. Make sure that everyone's gone through COVID-19 training, and you can't assume that everyone's glued to the news like we are, or that they're getting the information the same place that we are. I've talked to a lot of people who are getting it from influencers in various ways, and the facts just aren't there. So coming at it with that lens is important. Number 3 is to really make sure that everybody picks a safety lead and really has that leadership, either per shift, but definitely in the building, and they're filling out the protocols and really diving in. It's really just about sitting with those protocols, paying attention, making sure you're posting them and that everyone's seen them. And something that's key that I found is picking a top list of protocols that you reinforce over and over again. And a tool that we've built, we're now working with a couple of municipalities and Santa Monica, is these leads can go in, fill out 10 hit list questions that they're really focusing on: uniforms, PPE, floor markings, document it, and take photos of it. And that way they can A, establish the expectations, but B, as well as protect themselves to a degree. If OSHA or Department of Public Health comes knocking, you have a paper trail, which is really important. And this is starting to build as a conversation. I think it's really important, and you're doing it for the right reasons, but it's also helping you in the back end. 5 is communicating over and over your expectations and really your appreciation at the same time. I think it's huge, walking in every day and saying thank you. And we actually put together a course with a couple of municipalities as well that we're going to start to get out there about communicating with empathy during COVID, because we're trying to empower these young employees and associates out there to A, understand empathy, how to communicate with somebody that disagrees, how to talk to somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask, and the idea of the pause button, and the idea of to have affirmation, to agree with them originally, as opposed to conflict. And we can talk more about that. And 6 and final is really walking the walk. And you know what we found is, if somebody goes in and they see that you're actually doing it, you're showing like you care. Again, the bookends show that you care. There's less opportunities for people to dissent and to just not participate, or to argue with your team and say, why do I have to do it? And so these are the things that we've somewhat simplified that are really, really helpful, that we're training now as a company in these really scalable supportive tools. 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Jason. What we're going to do now is we're going to have an interchange between the members of the panel, but also at the same time, we also want to address any specific issues that you and the audience might have. So we could start off by using the chat box, but also depending on I'm looking at the number of participants, we may be able to even entertain live questions from the audience if Nick agrees and wants to unmute, allow folks to unmute themselves if they want to ask a live question. But let's start off with David. David, you had a really challenging situation of being a restaurant with not a lot of outdoor space, and not a huge personal private parking lot. How did you address that reality given the restrictions?
Sorry about that. Could you ask that question again?
So you were given the restrictions from the governor's office in terms of operations of your restaurant, along with everyone else in the restaurant industry, not being able to have people come inside. How did you address your ability to make money?
So it was the first month was really challenging. Obviously, people were trying to figure out what shelter in place meant. They probably went shopping, bought too much, and so probably didn't eat at restaurants. We used that time to figure out our operations. We streamlined our takeout. It's a lot different doing takeout versus sit-down dining. Sit-down dining is like, from 4 to 12 a.m. So you got like 8 hours to make your money. But like for us, our to-go operation, a lot of it is like in 3-4 hours from like 5 to 8, 9. And so you have to figure out how to cook that food fast enough and get it out there, for the drivers and for the people picking up in a timely, organized fashion. And so we developed the system. We're actually gonna, we actually just recently took out all the seats in the kitchen side so we can pack bags faster. We're talking to our kitchen designer to redesign the kitchen and maybe make a takeout window. So we're realizing that this is not gonna go away anytime soon. So you have to be flexible and adapt. And sure, if dining comes back, we can add the seats back. But right now, we need to make sure we support our team and make sure the kitchen is designed well enough to put out, maximum amount of food. And as for like dining outside, we don't have a large patio, but we did get the al fresco. But trying to follow the rules, we could only get like 4 seats outside. And so we actually decided to close a week earlier before they reclosed the restaurants because I just knew it just wasn't safe. And I care about my employees, and I just could tell like there was there's going to be a surge in cases, and I don't want to risk my employee's life just to serve someone dinner. It doesn't make any sense. So now we just focus on how to make money offsite with deliveries, or we sell frozen goods, and trying to figure out what other ways of making more income, whether that be consumer packaged goods, catering, or opening more places. Yeah, that's our story, I guess.
So Hunter, it's kind of an interesting approach that David has done in terms of being innovative. What are you seeing? What are you telling your folks in Santa Monica in terms of addressing the challenges with regards to the restrictions?
Yeah, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach for anybody, really. Like David mentioned, it totally depends on what kind of footprint you have, how much outdoor space you have. And one of the biggest victories that CRA got with the ABC, we were the ones who really pushed for the outdoor expansion of footprint. And that's what allows restaurants to serve alcohol on adjacent properties or in front of their property on the street, for example, or the sidewalk. We also were the ones that got the grocery store workarounds with the health department. And that is what allowed restaurants back in April and May to start operating as commissaries, selling groceries. And you're seeing a lot of that pop up around LA County and the state in general. So those are two huge things that CRA was able to accomplish that are allowing flexibility and creativity. So I think that's number one. I think it depends on your model, obviously. It depends on your size. If you're blessed with a giant parking lot, then absolutely you can use that to supplement some of your lost dining room square footage. But if you're not, like David was mentioning, you're just going to have to pivot to more of a delivery or packaged goods model, or just depending on what you sell from a food product standpoint, that's what you're going to have to look at. So it's not one size fits all. I mean, obviously, you want to capitalize on outdoor dining if you can. But I'm seeing restaurants start to get really creative with trying to get some of their products or sauces bottled and selling them online, looking to merchandise, all kinds of stuff, even licensing some of the things that they do. Or if there are chefs involved in the project who are of some note, getting some kind of TV people involved. I mean, all kinds of things I'm seeing. So it's really just all, it runs the whole gamut. I definitely am an advocate for the outdoor dining. That's why I pushed for it in Santa Monica, and now we're working on expanding it throughout the city. But it doesn't work for everybody. It works for some people, but not everyone. So, yeah.
So, Connor, I've got a question. So, in some of these restaurants that don't have adjacent parking or a street that's conducive to putting the parquet in, or the sidewalk, have any restaurants or municipalities looked at using some of the public parking ramps per se to, that probably aren't as busy as they were before, to maybe stage some restaurants in a public parking ramp, like 2 or 3 stories, and put it like a semi-permanent?
What do you mean a public parking ramp? Oh, you mean like a multi-level parking garage?
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. Not in Santa Monica yet, maybe in the future. But I know that I just saw an article actually that they were doing that. I think it's either in Pasadena or Glendale or somewhere up in that area, where I think they did turn one of those multi-level parking garages into an outdoor dining area. I'll try and find it, and I'll put a link in the chat. I think that is something that I'd like to hear Deborah weigh in on, quite frankly, because even before COVID, with ride sharing, once scooters were the hot topic in 2017 and 2018, and ride sharing, obviously the macro conversation with real estate as it pertains to the automobile culture in Southern California was centered around perhaps repurposing parking garages as additional retail space, or perhaps some kind of food hall, as crazy as that sounds. Right. Finding ways to creatively repurpose parking garages for those kinds of uses. And also it sort of dovetails into what downtown Santa Monica and other downtown areas are looking to do, which is cutting their building footprints in half and allowing for more of a European style alley store frontage for maybe ancillary businesses like breweries or shoe repair shops, or businesses that don't need that much square footage. So I think it's a kind of a fascinating discussion as it pertains to real estate. So I don't know, Deborah, if you have any thoughts on that from a national level, or trends you're seeing when it comes to sort of rethinking the way that the automobile or the declining use of automobiles rather is perhaps allowing people to get creative with their properties.
Well, at the moment, I really don't know where it's going as far as California or
nobody does.
Nobody knows. Yeah, but I mean, I do know that that's kind of been a topic that's been going on anyway over here. I mean, we ended up getting all the funding for extending the metro line out. We know we wanted to go into LAX. They're going to finally get it out to the South Bay. They know millennials in general don't want to drive cars. So instead of putting more money into, actually building our roads and everything, they're putting it into mass transit. But they still haven't worked out where those stops are going to go, how everything's going to look. So ultimately, they do see the fact that cars are declining. They've developed all those. They actually allowed that whole strip down Wilshire, where right now you can do multi-density property if you're near a metro line. So I assume that's going to come out once they extend the metro line out to the South Bay and areas, because, as you see all that building that they're doing off of kind of like that mid-Wilshire area, it's just going up like crazy right now because they just assume everyone doesn't need the parking requirement. They're going to be able to just piggyback off the metro line. I do know that there have been a lot of bills that have been trying to be passed, even in the South Bay, where if you're a single family house, you can actually now build the ADUs on it for rentals because of the housing crisis. But they're also, even around PCH going down into the South Bay, they've been talking about making more high density items because parking's kind of becoming a non-issue. So I think it ties into that, but there's nothing really that's happened to say, yes, we're definitely going down this path in California and what it means to, local cities still have some control. And I know the state's trying to take that away and to say the cities don't have control if we're passing this because we need it, but it's still too soon to tell where it's going to go.
Right.
Interesting.
Actually, going back to the garage idea, when I was at Taco Bell, we were exploring in New York City putting shipping container restaurants in the bottom of some parking garages in New York City to kind of be a late night restaurant that could kind of capture, some of the bar crowd. After people have gone out of the bars, we'd have like a shipping container in there and a restaurant that would serve a limited item, set of items, but it would just tuck right into the basement, the lower floor of a parking garage.
Jonathan, drunks don't go to Taco Bell. What are you talking about? Come on.
But, Jonathan, they have a lot of that right now in Europe. There was a really cool place. I was just in London at the end of last year. And they have this whole stretch where they actually put shipping containers next to each other.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like everything's a pop-up shop. And
Love
I'm sure
that.
they probably have a shared kitchen somewhere in there, or at least shared storage where they can put stuff. But it's a lot of restaurants, a lot of community seating. Obviously, that could be space, but it really does kind of help where, you can just have these small restaurants function without having such a high, which is great. But it was really neat. It was all shipping containers. And they made it so pretty. And then there are 2 levels of it too. Like they built into them on the bottom, and then you had this top part that was all outdoors. So it's quite amazing. It's like, it would be nice to kind of see everything out here, get a little bit more creative on how they see restaurants operating and even businesses operating.
So I will say just one last comment, and then I'll turn it back over to Larry on what you just said, Deborah. Getting creative is definitely something the business community is very good at, but unfortunately it's not something that local government is designed to do quickly, right? So, what's critical in times like this, which are, let's be fair, unprecedented, it's critical that local governments rapidly adopt internal policies and machinations to become nimble themselves and allow for creativity to happen, right? Santa Monica's actually been great with that, and other cities have been pretty good at it too. I've heard of some cities not being very good at it, not being very open to it, and a lot of that is some political calculus, quite frankly, that the cities are making when it comes to its residents, obviously, who might be somewhat opposed to some of these ideas. But one thing that I think we're starting to see is a paradigm shift in the way that politicians are taking into consideration what I think we can agree is an overly vocal minority when it comes to resident opposition to some of these ideas. Because, when the tax revenue dries up, they're not going to be able to pay for the services that the residents really want, right?
Yep.
So I think there has to be that consideration when it comes to local government. And luckily, we're seeing kind of a turning of the tide when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. Jason, are there any creative ideas that we haven't mentioned on the call so far that you'd like to review with us, or any implications of creativity that cause you some concern in terms of health and safety?
The biggest thing that I think that we're seeing, and that's why I love it, where what Hunter's doing in the efforts is outdoor, which is great, where you want to move people past an outdoor. I think getting creative, what I love is to kind of dive into this is, it's an art installation, your restaurant and your locations, and leaning into the safety as that as well. Whether it's the branding on your face mask, whether it's not putting tape down, but putting hopscotch, right? Or putting areas to separate the markings 6 feet distance for people to stand, instead of it being caution tape and alert and danger. It's really getting into it in a creative fashion. It's actually amazing to me that Trader Joe's is taking so long and they still have blue tape down, which I know when they pull up, you're going to see the sun marks on it and they're going to be stuck with this. And that a company that's such a culture-based company, that they haven't truly leaned into all these sayings that you can put, that it's somewhat of a journey. And I've seen some of these restaurants do it, again, from the masks, whether they're a smile or the gritting teeth, to adventures or balloons as you're walking on the floor. And that I find is creative that people can do, as well as the partitions. Some people are looking at it as plexiglass. Some people are creating these frames, these nicer restaurants where you're actually bordering and framing the separations and leaning into it. And so, again, saying that hospitality is the ultimate form of safety, I've really appreciated that, the opportunity, and while obviously respecting the cost of it, respecting really the opportunity to expand the brand and to lean into the design of it.
I think you bring up a very good point, and that when we get caught up in the midst of the crisis, we forget that the separating, the defining characteristic of a successful operator in the restaurant business is one who does not lose track of the fact that it's theater. It's part of entertainment.
That's it.
People don't go to a restaurant just to be fed. They could be fed at home. They go to a restaurant for the experience. And if you can really help to refine, define, and take that person away from the humdrum, from the fear, and turn what is ultimately a safety procedure into something that's fun, it'll be an enjoyable experience and a memorable one for the customer.
100%, and more of a participation and more of a reason to go back. And that starts with your pre-shifts with your team, is getting them to understand why we're rallying together and really focusing on the team, and then letting that carry through and carry over to then how they're going to project that to the guests. And there's an anxiety level. We feel each other's energies. We do. And so when you're coming into a space, an outdoor space as well, and there's this trust and this idea of like, okay, let's lean into it. Let's lean into the experience. It's going to translate into trust of your employees, as well as then how they're going to invite everybody back in. And it's an art installation. And I would say, to kind of jump on this, I'm a partner in a couple different restaurant groups out here, and I've expanded. And I would love coming into the first day of training and telling everybody pre-COVID, you're part of an installation. The words we use, the language, the way we point with an open palm instead of a pointing finger, all of these things come together subversively and obviously together to form this innate feeling. And so if you've joined our art installation and you're an actor, which works out here, in participating into it, so I really kind of lean into what they're going for, play the role. And then if you ever invite me into one of your experiences, I'll play the role as well. And it's that idea of this give and take, and translating that over. And you know what you'll start to do, and I'm going to kind of carry this over to the next one. What I think is, if you build this, it's an opportunity to build the culture as well as the structure, pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. You're going to attract the people who want to participate and appreciate the structure and the identity and the themes. And then they're going to attract the guests the same way. And it just becomes this beacon and this cyclical motion of success.
So
love it. I'm imagining going to like a TGI Fridays when it's part of the flair to have like the hand sanitizer and the sprays and stuff like that. I love it. I can't wait.
Flare it out. And the nicer companies that put nice bottles, like an old time barbershop bottle of sanitizer with this beautiful little spigot on it.
Bespoke COVID prevention. Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Great. Okay, I'm going to throw you all a curveball. I didn't prepare you for this question.
Oh, God.
But okay, we're talking to a group of folks in the city of Beverly Hills. And everyone has been to Beverly Hills. You understand the dynamic of the various neighborhoods in the city of Beverly Hills. We have significant restrictions in terms of not being a landlocked city, not having restaurants with lots of wide open spaces, having a tremendous number of fine dining, white linen tablecloth restaurants that don't lend themselves to a takeout and to-go environment. What do you say to, what are some issues or situations or approaches that might be beneficial for businesses? Yes,
I'll take that one. I'll start. I'll throw myself under the bus. Honestly, I think that people just have to get real about the situation that we're in and about what they're willing to do. I think that anybody can pivot their business model, at least to some degree, for the current times, right? I've seen some really successful high-end fine dining restaurants pivot to a really booming takeout business. And it all depends on how it's done, right? I mean, we're talking very beautifully done to-go packaging. The food is perfectly deconstructed. It comes with professionally designed reheating instructions and reconstruction instructions, and they're killing it. They're doing very, very well. What I think the biggest problem is the mentality that a lot of these legacy restaurants and quite frankly, some of their employees who have been there for 20, 30 years have internally, where they just say, I'm not going to do that, or I don't want to do that, or, our food is so good and so above reproach. And our process is so pristine that we can't possibly pivot to what we view as a lesser model by doing some kind of takeout or to go or picnic, whatever you want to call it, right? Everyone can do something. And I think it just requires creativity. And I think that's just the way it is. And I think that the people who adapt to that quicker are going to be the ones that survive. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody sees this going away in the next couple mm-hmm. of months. Outdoor space is going to be at a premium. And even when this crisis abates, the public still will not have the confidence to pack into a dining room for quite some time, in my opinion. So I think that exploring other revenue streams is going to be crucial to long-term survival for any restaurant, no matter where they are.
Hunter, I was going to ask, have you seen any of the chefs doing like sous vide packs, like individual servings or individual like portions, however they would, like, for example, if a chef was preparing their stuff sous vide and had them in the vacuum packages, so the person at home purchasing it would just have to finish it in the cast iron skillet or on the grill or whatever. Have you seen that?
Not so much. That's not to say that it's not being done. I personally haven't seen it. I'm sure some of them are. Some of the fine dining restaurants in Santa Monica that are doing really good to go, like Pajoli on Main Street. And, we have Rasa Blue in downtown. They're doing great. And then, Sugarfish has always had fantastic to-go packaging for anyone that's ordered from them. They have the really beautiful flip-top boxes with the pictograms and it's so well done. But they've been doing that for years. So they're still doing very well. No sous vide.
Can we turn Beverly Hills into an art installation itself on the streets? Now I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to convince like the pastry chef over at Gucci. I'm like, you make the greatest desserts and everything. Beverly Hills has the best alleys in the city. Yeah, they're amazing. Now, granted, you're behind a UPS and a FedEx that are trying to get past each other with a quarter of an inch. But it really does have the best alleys in the city. And like,
it really does.
How do we create this drive-through, this ultimate drive-through where everyone throws up two of their things, their top sellers, and you go through and you pick, and it becomes this drive-through art installation mart once a day that you threw your one or two items and contactless payment and purchase. Todd, let's set it up.
It's funny you mentioned that. We were just talking with Gucci last week about they want to do something with their alley.
Because I told them, do something with your alley. No, sorry.
Yeah, no, they do. There are. So what you guys are talking about is actually in the works of talking, and the city is very interested in it because, we looked at potentially closing down Cannon to, foot traffic only. Well, it's just not practical. So what we're looking at, we've got these parklets, which you're seeing to come up everywhere. Restaurants are going out into the street. We're building dining rooms, essentially, and going out across the sidewalks into the street. There's going to be a type of a K-rail, but hopefully something nicer than K-rail sitting there. But, what you were talking about, these high-end restaurants, Spago has completely flipped and done what they're having to do to survive. And Wolfgang and her have done a good job on what they've done in their little cul-de-sac down there. But all these high-end restaurants are trying to, they're having to think outside the box. I spent 20 years with Lowry's. So when you talk about tradition and no, this is our only way and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, yeah, I know some restaurants like that. But they're having to think outside the box because they won't survive if they don't. And most people get that. So, but I'm all for doing whatever it takes. And you know, the good thing is we have the city behind us. They are willing to open it up, and you know, there's no permitting fees when we're doing this. These guys are doing this, there's signage, all this thing. So whatever you guys are doing, we would love to share the ideas and even do it here. But I think, yeah, down at the end of the street where you guys are, Jason, yeah, we could do a lot of stuff down there.
And Todd, I got a question for you. Sorry, Jason, go ahead. I'll ask after.
Well, I guess it's just piggybacking on, Hunter threw me off there, but where you're coming together of the limited items. But you know, what's an interesting thing is, I learned this a long time ago when Umami Burger built. Umami Burger scaled right when the crash happened in 2008. And what was really interesting about it was, I was a server at Mastro's years ago and previously, and I had seen coming into Umami, the same people who were paying $110 a meal coming in for a burger that was good quality, because they were minimizing what their expenses were. They lost a bit of their retirement and everything and their money, but they needed to feel abundant in some particular way. And I watched these people come over because that same burger brought that same feeling. One of the reasons Sweet Lady Jane, another one, and not to speak of non-Beverly Hills points, but we're kind of tying into this businesses. But what I always loved was, I said, you're going to do good if the crash or things start to happen again, because that bite of that triple berry cake makes you feel abundant. And Beverly Hills represents abundance. Beverly Hills represents travel. When we can't travel, if you're not living in Beverly Hills and you're coming to it per se, there's an opportunity to build this beautiful experience. And so by going down one of the ways that you break off, and maybe you're getting 5 different restaurants to participate, 2 dishes each, and little things that you throw into the car and great packaging, we can get creative with this, that we give people driving through and organize this feeling of abundance, this experience that they've got in the middle of COVID, and really attracting them to what the city's doing and build on that heartbeat. I see it.
Yeah. Todd, I had a question for you. So like, you know, like on Main Street in Santa Monica, what we're doing, we do have K-Rail, but we also have other parts of the city where we're not doing K-Rail, and we're allowing restaurants to have kind of their own more customizable designs for parklets.
Right.
So you said the city was behind it. Is the city financing whatever's going to happen? And I know you mentioned that pedestrian traffic on Cannon was not feasible. I'm curious because we've had tons of discussions in Santa Monica already. I have tons of beta on, you know, from residents organizations and businesses and all that. I'd be happy to chat with you offline about that if you want. But like, what was the reasoning behind that? Is it just because it's not feasible?
Honestly, there's 2 main reasons. One, the businesses for the most part weren't supporting it on Cannon. They didn't want it to shut down. But second, we've got 2 parking structures down by the Montage, or what was the Montage, and then one up here by my office, North Cannon. They each park like 450 cars, and they're both exit entry from Beverly and Cannon. So if you cut off Cannon and you got all those cars coming in and out on just Beverly, it's not good, because we went through traffic and the police and we did a study and all this kind of stuff. Now there are other streets in the city that we can look at. We're, you know, crustaceans on Camden, and we're looking at doing stuff, you know, all the way from because we met with Ocean Prime, and we met with Medeo, we met with Mr. Chow. I mean, Mr. Chow, who's been around forever, they're thinking outside the box and doing stuff, and they're gonna kind of line up this restaurant way, so to speak, kind of what you guys have been talking about on that street. And that's a one-way street. It's much more practical to do it. And they'll do a closure of 1 lane. And if it works out to where it makes sense to close the street, I think they will. Because the city's not.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah,
but
there's a lot of
again,
moving
it was
parts.
just- there was a lot of people who were against it, frankly, and
Yeah, no, I hear you. One thing I will say, and I'll turn it back over to Larry. I don't want to, dominate this, but one thing we did find is that in all city government discussions, it's usually one, like I mentioned earlier, the overly vocal minority who are very anti just everything. They're anti-development, they're anti-losing parking, all this stuff. What I've found really fascinating out of what we did in Santa Monica is that when you kind of, I don't want to say call them out, but if you just acknowledge openly that, like, in this particular situation, their concerns, while valid, don't get to dictate the macroeconomic policy of the city, they just kind of quiet down real quick. You know what I mean? And some of the businesses, yes, like on Main Street in Santa Monica, there are several businesses who hate what we've done. They send me hate mail every day. Like, you're the worst person in the world, and like, you're going to crush our business, every day. But 90% of the businesses send me very thankful messages every day. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it's one of those things that
I get both of those letters too.
Yeah.
So it's,
yeah.
and I got to tell you, I've worked with the city for a long time, between 20 years at Lowry's and now 5 years in this role. And this is probably the most cooperative this city's ever been when it comes to working with businesses. So I'd love to have an offline conversation, because if there's some things that other cities are doing that we can do here, I think it'd be great.
Yeah. Sure. Larry, what's next? What are we talking about next?
So let's switch to maintaining and motivating workforces. If you can't get people to show up, you don't have anything to work with.
That's right. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in on the idea. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the stimulus or with the $600, whether or not where that passes and doesn't pass. And obviously, it's a very sensitive issue. On one end, there's no incentive to go back. On the other end, while there really isn't the business to support your employees, owners don't want their employees going hungry. Neither does anybody. And so it's a good reason why I'm happy I'm not in Congress or anyone in that sense. It's a difficult, because we need to take care of each other. So that's going to be an interesting motivating factor if people have to come back, because a lot of people are having, at least restaurants that I've talked to, and I won't speak for David and other operators, where difficult getting people to come back. And so if money isn't the reason, then the big thing to me is not underestimating how much they're scared to come back, and then going back into obviously the zone that I focused in on, which is providing this safe environment and letting them know long before they even enter how much you take this seriously and their safety seriously, and really showing them. There's a lot of people in our business that are just kind of punks to a degree, and we see it in compliance and different things of, we'll follow, but no one really cares. There's a lot of people who care, and we're going to see this start to permeate and percolate through employees blowing the whistle on employers. And so I think number one is really leading into, we're really taking this seriously with safety.
David, what are you experiencing with your employees? And I mean, I know you mentioned that you weren't going to be open, but like, what are you going through? Curious.
When we were open for in-house dining, it was a little difficult, only because of the unemployment, but also there wasn't enough shifts because we wanted to bring back enough people, but also spread it out in case we needed coverage. And it was difficult for employees because some of them live like in North Hollywood. They would take public transportation, put themselves at risk. And what we did was we gave hazard pay, extra $2, like everything else. And then, I think what Jason said is, like, we showed our employees, I mean, before or pre and post COVID, we always care about our employees. They're our number one asset. And so I think recently we just tested everybody out of our own pocket just because we wanted a clean slate after July 4th. It cost us $5,000. It was like crazy.
Wow.
Because you think about it, how can I schedule 30 employees at Dodger Stadium all at the same time? And so we decided to use the local urgent care. They came in and tested everybody. Everybody was negative. We spent like $10,000 on PPE. Like, gloves alone are crazy. Gloves are like $10 a box right now. So they're like 10, 12 cents each. And so we spent like $5,000 on gloves, and just happened to be a shortage right now. So the prices are going up like crazy. Like a case is like $100. It's like crazy. And so obviously we bought all the right protection. We went from like 88 seats to like 26 seats. And that's why some people say like, parklets are like, oh, you can do some parklets, but like it would take me at least 30 seats to make it worth everyone's while. The bartender, the 2 servers, a runner, right? A manager. So there's a lot of economics involved, but definitely we care about our employees. We have a great culture, and it just starts with, just like Jason said, just caring about our people, and showing them that we care and taking all the right steps.
Yeah, and I hear you. It's definitely a tough calculus. If you're an employee and you're getting $600 a week right now, what's the point? Which is actually $1,000 a week in California if you top out $1,050. What's the point in going back to work and putting yourself at risk, right? Like there is none. So I think that it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next round of stimulus.
Well, Jonathan has had some experience in his life in the retail restaurant space of managing through a number of crises. Jonathan, could you give us some insight on your experience?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was at Taco Bell when we had several big crises. The whole E. coli in lettuce, and we had the big rats thing in New York.
Oh wow!
A bunch of different things, but yeah, I mean, it's really kind of at first it's a real, it's a real punch in the gut to everyone who works there, employees, owners, everyone, but you just got to kind of get through it and, have a good solid plan and execute on that plan and get out of it. And a lot of it's PR. A lot of it's how you talk about it, and, being honest right up front with what happens. And I've seen some examples of that during the COVID thing here in some local restaurants. We've had local restaurants that have closed early in the pandemic and put a handwritten sign that really nobody thought anything about, but was posted on the window. And then of course, like next door, everything spreads like wildfire on next door. And pretty soon everyone's got an opinion of, how poorly they handled that whole communication piece. But
next door is the worst.
It is. But I mean, that's what people look at, And so I think having a good head around how you communicate during a crisis, and how you, what your plans are going forward, why you did what you did. And I mean, that really helps, because if you don't provide those answers, people are going to come up with it on their own, how they got there. So communication's a key.
Communication is key, and I'm going to jump in on that. And
Yep.
I learned that a while back, where if you just want to kind of hide, if you have nothing to say, even just telling people where you are along in the way in the process is invaluable. And even in the vulnerability of the moment. What I'm hoping kind of comes out of this is a disarming of the expectations of this perfection in these walls. And granted, what's going on is we're dividing even more, building up our walls and going to our corners. But whether it comes down to legislature, and like we talked about at the beginning, the ability to kind of break through the bureaucracy and get things through an opening faster and get people to communicate, as well as just disarming the expectation of perfection and saying, these are our intentions, this is what we're going for. Obviously communicating in bold print, right? You don't want to leave too much you want to control the narrative, but at least make sure you've got those solid key points that people can chew on and digest easily. But that's something that I've been encouraging with operators a lot, is just talk. And so Larry, back to the original question, is just talking to your team and like safely distance, but having these conversations with them and communicating and being a human to a human is important.
Okay, let's pivot a bit and ask Deborah to talk about an issue that she brought up earlier that's on the minds of most restaurant operators, and that is the whole lease issue and the challenges.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we are in a situation where most landlords out there, I mean, not the ones who've owned the property forever, but in general, people have high mortgage payments on their properties. If they bought, you know, a shopping center recently or anything that has a restaurant in it or any retail space for that matter. I mean, even look at shopping centers right now, you're carrying a lot of payment, but risk of having money coming in. I think everyone's in a place of fear, right? The business owners are in a place of fear of how we're going to survive. But I'm not sure if they really think about how much fear the landlord's in that same situation for the most part. Not everyone, but a lot of them are. Even if they try to sell their shopping centers right now, who's really in the market to buy at a premium? It would be really, I'd look to buy your space for a discount for an investment in the future. Every investor I have looking right now is always looking for the discount. They don't want anything at full price at this point. So we have two groups coming in a place of fear. And I think maybe sometimes if you're in that situation, you're not trying to talk about how do we work together on this? What can we do to survive together? I think sometimes it's like, you owe me this or you owe me this. So I really feel like the conversations really need to take place from hey, we're in the same situation. How can we make this work? We want to make this work. I mean, the landlords are struggling just as much as the business owners at this point. My parents own quite a bit of property, and we've been having a lot of our owners come to us asking us, hey, can we open up in a parking lot? Can we do this? And, you know, everyone's approaching stuff from a really thoughtful conversation. And obviously, I can't imagine any landlord out there that doesn't want a business in their section that they want them to survive. They want that paycheck coming in. So I do believe that we just need to position this into having a conversation and being creative. Maybe there's like obviously you're locked into your lease. Maybe there's ways to get out of it. Obviously, unless we read a lease, we can't figure that out. But maybe there's a way to approach a landlord to say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now. Maybe we can shift how I pay rent in the next few months, as far as maybe when I hit certain kind of operation or, you know, sales goals, I can give you a percentage on top of it to kind of make up for some of my shortcomings or any of this back rent that I have. So, I mean, I believe that there are probably a lot of options out there and a lot of stuff we haven't thought about. Those conversations that we'd have between business owner and landlord in a thoughtful way to say, how do we work through this together? How can we make this happen? Could really lead to a lot of interesting situations. And I don't know, I mean, I assume, Todd, that you guys are pulling in landlords in these conversations when you're talking to the cities. It's not just the businesses at that point.
Very much. I have, as you can imagine, I have obviously members that are restaurants and businesses, but also landlords,
Yes.
a fair amount. And the city asked us to put together a group of landlords to really discuss all these things, because everything you're saying is exactly dead on. I mean, all the businesses are screaming they need help and they need to snap. Some of these landlords need help.
Everyone's putting the burden on them, right? To say you're going to carry all of these people for the next year or something, right? Or it keeps getting pushed out, but they are in just as much crisis right now.
Yeah, I really think, you know, when people are up against the walls, when they show their true colors. So you want to be obviously negotiating and having a conversation with the landlord or the tenant in a good way, because I think there's a gazillion different ways to work it out.
Right.
But there are some retailers that are idiots, and then there are some landlords that are idiots, right?
Agreed.
So hopefully no one here is dealing with any of those.
We deal with idiots every day.
Well, I do too. So. But anyway,
I have two questions. I have two questions for you. So Deborah, I'm curious because we have a business bid.
Hunter, I have to drop off for 11 o'clock, but I really appreciate listening to you guys. And if I can help you with anything, Jason, we'll have to get together here sometime. So, but you guys are great.
I'll go to the Gucci store.
If I can ever help you. Yeah, we're going to do a tour of it this week, actually.
All right.
But anyway, I hope to see you guys soon.
Okay. See you, Todd. So Deborah, one thing that I question for you. I've tried to broker a lot of truces essentially between restaurants and their property owners, right? And this started back in March and April. And essentially what I recommended to them was something called an extend and blend. You might call it something different. It's essentially just, giving people a break on the front end of their lease, making it up on the back end, so the property owner is made whole essentially by the end of the term, right? I know that we spoke about the prospect of, from a national level, what would happen from a legislative front if there was a national restaurant rent strike. Cheesecake Factory made a lot of waves back in March when it wrote a letter to its property owners nationwide that they just weren't going to pay the rent, right? I don't know if you saw that, but that was kind of the first big restaurant chain. Right. And that was so key, I think, because there's really nowhere for their property owners to go. What are they going to do? Kick Cheesecake Factory out and get somebody else to come in there and pay all that rent? No. So I think that what I've heard from a lot of these property management companies and owners is that they need help from the federal government, right? And right now there's not enough urgency from the federal government's vantage point. Like there's not enough pain essentially. So I think the whole idea that is starting to percolate of this national restaurant rent strike would actually help property owners, because it would give them the ammo they need to really effectively lobby to the national government and say, we need you to bail us out, right?
Maybe.
What do you think about that?
I know when you said that earlier, that might happen. But if you think about what's happening from a landlord perspective, and maybe because, I deal with stuff from a landlord perspective just because I run all my parents' properties. Luckily, they've owned everything pretty free and clear. But, I have a lot of clients who actually carry back big payments and everything that goes on. Every day I'm looking at news on CoStar or, Daily Breeze, LA Times, whatever it might be, where the burden keeps getting put more and more on the landlord supporting it, because they feel like there's this idea that they have the wealth, so they can afford it, right? But clearly,
which isn't always true.
Yeah, they have their mortgages, they have everything else. And, part of these issues that you think about, if you propose a plan where it all kind of ends up on the back end, so at that point, you're still saying, landlord, you're carrying all the risk up front. Right. What happens if this person bails? Let's be honest. All these people who bail right now, their landlords aren't going to be able to collect on that. Our court systems are backed up. Nobody's going to end up kind of holding nothing and having trouble to rent. Totally. So I think we're pushing them into a corner that just feels like it's getting bigger and bigger. So I almost feel like the conversation really needs to be like, we understand the position you're in. We're in this crazy position too. Maybe let's look at this stuff like on almost like a monthly basis, right? How do we get through this month? How do we get through next month? How can we keep pivoting for both of us to feel some security?
Totally understand. Who is the number one or number three, like, property owner advocacy groups in California? I honestly don't know. Who would they be?
I don't even know that, honestly.
Because, well, that's actually refreshing to hear you say that, because some of the restaurant advocacy groups that I'm involved in, they don't know either, right? And they would love to partner with a property owner advocacy group and talk this out, right? To figure out some creative solutions and work on them together. Obviously, the defeat of SB 939 at the state level, and that would have allowed restaurants to kind of back out of their leases. That was a huge issue for property owners, and that's
scary for anything. That's just
of course.
I think when these legislatures are putting in all of these, just trying to pass bills, it's like, with everything that even happens, where how can you even prove then if it's COVID related or not, or just somebody that finally says, I was going to go out of business anyway, I can just get out of it.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of restaurants were on shaky financial ground even pre-COVID. Yeah. So COVID was really just the hammer.
Yeah. So I almost just like, it kind of goes back to it. it even goes back to what you said, Jason, about coming from a place of, empathy and true, like saying, hey, you know what, how can we do this together? And there's probably not a clear-cut answer, and everything keeps changing. But I almost feel like the conversation really needs to be at more of a monthly level. Just keep the communication open. I understand the position you're in. You're understanding the position I'm in. All right, how do we get through this month? How do we get through the next month until some normalcy can kind of happen and the lease can kind of just start taking itself over? Because they're in the exact same situation, if not maybe a little worse, because everyone keeps putting the burden on them.
I appreciate you bringing that back in, because I was actually going to ask you that. I mean, it comes down right to everyone has the bills to pay. And we were even talking, if there's some point of relief from the government down and through the stimulus and through the banks that can release the loans, and every relief is there's an opportunity. When Hunter and I have talked in other advocacy groups, I've said we can't villainize the landlords at this point, because while some do own and sure, and there's all that stuff, there's still also the generational idea of, I'm going to make my grandfather proud that I'm running it and I'm going to take care of everything. I mean, there's so much that's involved between the balance sheet and the ego and all that's coming into it. So hearing you talk about the approach as well, which is what I'm saying in everything, it's actually something that I'm really leaning into, is how do we minimize the ego and come into the moment with more empathy, that helps.
Just think about even any of these places, even if the family has owned the business for forever. Well, that one maybe not so much, but anything that maybe somebody's purchased a property in the last, let's say, since Prop 13 days or something, or even the last 20 years, their property taxes and insurance and maintenance on the property is quite a bit. If none of their tenants are able to pay money, forget about the loan on the property they have. Let's even say they own it free and clear. I mean, that's like thousands and thousands of dollars out of their pocket just to keep that building running without people paying rent.
Is there,
so it's just, you know, the landlord does have this responsibility that's not going to go away financially, because the you know, maybe, you know, there are lenders who are giving a break on, you know, loan payments for now, but ultimately the government's going to want their property taxes. They're not going to let that go away at any time.
Well, that's
you still have to
why
pay
I
your
think,
insurance on the property, you know, everything.
Yeah.
You still need that general
what-
upkeep in order to, like, you know, your parking lot lights, all the electricity,
that's
everything
why
that goes.
I think the only way out of this for so many property owners nationwide is for the federal government to provide some path out. You know,
They've
'cause
only
it's not
been
gonna come
focusing
from
on
the
the retailer, but they're not focusing on the landlord. And I don't know if a national wide, I'm not sure how the government will take that, honestly. But or even people are kind of villainizing the landlord.
I really love history, and I just finished a fantastic history book, so I can get into the long history of insurrections in the United States from you know, tenant property owner perspective, but I'll save that for another webinar.
But I mean, in this situation, it's just kind of like trying to remind everybody, everyone's in the same boat. So I think having thoughtful conversations to try to work through stuff together, pivot, what makes sense, what's fair, not just, you know, keeping, like, there has to be a little balance somewhere. And I think people can work through stuff.
I think you bring up a great point, though, Hunter. It's difficult if you don't have all the factions at the table when you're discussing resolution of a problem. So just having the landlord and the retailer at the table, that's not enough, because there's one more party here, and that's the person who's imposing the taxes. That's the tax authorities.
Right.
They have to be at the table, because they ultimately have the hammer.
Yeah,
That they can
totally.
wield. And it's not, the landlord has limited power to the degree, his limited wealth and his ability to use that wealth.
That's right. The federal government is putting all of this, not all of it, but, you know, they're putting a huge brunt of it on the lower parts of the ladder, when really, I mean, the only way out of it is for the federal government to bail out property owners. It's not unprecedented. In fact, we saw it 12 years ago after the crash of 2008. The banks got bailed out. A lot of other mega corporations got bailed out. So in this particular crisis, I don't think it's crazy to insinuate that there needs to be a bailout for, you know, smaller property owners nationwide.
Yeah, but I mean, just think about it right now too. On the November ballot, there will be that ballot kind of tied into it's a school bond initiative instead, where they're basically trying to get rid of Prop 13 for commercial properties. So just think about the ramifications of that on landlords and business owners throughout all of California. I mean, it would just be crazy what that would do for any kind of triple net lease out there right now.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's all going to come back on us, because ultimately everyone's going to have to raise their prices for us to actually pay for that anyway, for that massive increase that will take effect.
Well, so you said something, and I don't know how much time we have, Larry. If we need to pivot or do something else, let me know.
We've got about 10 minutes left before we make closing comments.
Okay, so I'll touch very briefly on what you just said, Deborah. And this is actually one of the biggest underlying unspoken, well, it's not unspoken, rarely spoken of issues in the food and beverage industry in the United States. Every part of the food and beverage industry is to some degree subsidized in a way, all the way from the farmers up to the consumers who are getting delivery right now because of COVID, right? We're not paying the true cost of many of these goods, whether it's milk or fruit, because of tax deals or trade deals. The easiest way to look at this subsidizing phenomenon is in delivery right now, right? There's a delivery war going on, and the only end result is a conglomeration. We see it with Uber acquiring Postmates recently, and eventually the only losers are going to be consumers, right? Because we're not paying the true cost for delivery right now. We're paying a subsidized cost that is being funded by investors, by venture capitalists, to thin the field out, right? There's no way that it costs $2.50 to have another human being drive a meal to you from across the city, right? It doesn't work. So they're losing all this cash, and it's a way to thin the herd out. So what happens when there's only one or two delivery companies out there and they have to start charging the real cost? It's the same thing with Uber and other tech companies like this. So that lopsided pricing structure has to be reconciled at some point in the food and beverage industry. And I think that's going to create a massive wave in multiple directions. Just, we're getting outside the scope of this call. I think we're talking massive stuff here. But anyway,
I'm going to jump in and kind of take it back after this sidebar, but I want to bring back to one other thing, and then Larry, kind of jumping into Carl's question over on the chat about the P&L. So one thing, and this might be, Hunter and I have talked on various calls, and so Deborah, maybe from this industry as well, is I think it's an incredible opportunity for people to open up their P&L and not necessarily put their name on it, but they're victims in the villainization of everyone thinks, and kind of this is before knowing you're on this call, this is something that's been said forever, that every restaurant owner is sitting, and I read this once, like the CEO of Taco Bell, and this was 10 years ago when they were making $8 million a year and all this type of stuff, is that you think that the restaurant owner, that everyone's living in this high castle, and the unionization when they're coming at, and there's good and bad, but coming after the small restaurant owner, when you tell somebody that the 4% is the average of a restaurant, a lot of people are like, wait, what? And then, so now when you talk about Deborah getting into the fact of, you're right, even if they still have the ownership, the cams, the maintenance, everything that's going on still comes money out of the pocket. Granted, there are a lot of good examples of bars where they're rocking the 40% profit, and you've got the Westfields that were, but if we can, I'm really leaning into this opportunity that with the industry, we're showing just the basic 10-point profit and loss, simple, maybe even 4 points, that people can understand is like, wait a minute, you're right. I didn't think that you had these costs. I didn't think that you had to pay these things. I didn't think that for every, employees don't know that if I'm paying you $15 an hour, I'm actually paying $20 an hour because I've got workers' comp on top, payroll taxes. They don't know this, and there might be a real opportunity to just educate everybody. I literally want the book of P&Ls built out of this.
Yeah,
where we can all come from.
We did that. We did that back in 2015 and 2016 when the minimum wage was going up. CRA and other advocacy groups did open a lot of P&Ls that were obviously redacted to legislators. A lot of their eyes just glaze over when they look at restaurant P&Ls. So I think simplifying it is key for sure.
Simplify.
And yes, they're definitely shocked when they find that it's a statewide average of 4%. So it's definitely a good tactic. Most lawmakers, and anyone who's done any lobbying knows this, most lawmakers don't know anything about how to run a restaurant. They just don't. And it's not their fault because they're lawmakers, right? I mean, I don't know anything about an auto mechanic store. I would have no clue. Like chemical, I have no idea. So if you find a simple way to kind of explain some of these hardships to them, and that goes for city leaders just as much as anyone else. It's
the book of P&Ls. We just came up with it.
Yeah,
we're doing it.
Book of P&Ls. We're doing it. All right.
Well,
Larry.
Sure lawmakers don't realize how triple net leases are going to get jacked if this law passes, especially for the people who've owned property for a really long time. Their property taxes are no longer going to be under 10 grand a year.
Mm-hmm.
Especially owning property in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, or any of these Southern California locations.
Larry, where are we at?
So I think what we want to do now is first make sure that there are no unanswered questions from the audience. We've covered a wide variety of topics. Does anyone have a specific question that they would like to have answered that has not been answered? You can put it into the chat. And if there are no other questions, what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists make a closing statement based on where you see things today. Either give us some words of inspiration or some words of caution.
Ooh. I'll go last. I don't want to go first. All right, I'll go first. I'll take it. Sure. I mean, I'm a fan. Jason's gonna laugh at me because he and I talk about things like this all the time. I'm a famous negative Nancy. Like in every group that I'm ever a part of, I'm always the devil's advocate, and I'm always like, but what if a comet comes down? Like I'm always that guy. But I think that, I have a slightly more optimistic viewpoint of this situation. Because I've done a lot of lobbying and because I've done a lot of civic stuff, and because I've worked with unions on crafting like language for minimum wage ordinances and things like that, and because I'm aware of the macroeconomic trends of our nation, and that's why I bring up things like nationwide rent strikes and subsidization and all that, I think that this is a great opportunity for the restaurant industry to sort of rectify a lot of things that have been lopsided for a long time, not just from a true food cost perspective or a cost of product perspective, but like with labor and your business model and how, but most importantly, how restaurants present themselves as anchor tenants of communities, right? Because I think that for so long, restaurants have been kind of like this redheaded stepchild of neighborhoods and cities where they're just viewed as complainers and they're problem children, and people are drinking alcohol and they make trash and all this. But what lawmakers have noticed immediately after this COVID experience is how essential restaurants are to every single community, right? So very rapidly, and I'm talking within the course of a couple of weeks, when restaurants, when cities were having their finance departments look at budgets for the next 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, and they realized that they had no money because there was no tax revenue from hotels, from restaurants, from any kind of tourism, things like that. There was this instant reckoning amongst politicians and city staff and leaders at how essential restaurants were to the fabric of any community. So I think right now is one of the most optimistic times in food and beverage history in America, because we finally have some real leverage when it comes to working with city governments, state governments, and the national governments to sort of making it easier for us to do business and recognizing how essential restaurants are to just every community. I mean, we pay for the police, we pay for the fire departments. We're the number 1 or number 2 tax producer in the state of California consistently. What happens if we go away, right? What happens if we're reduced by 50%? So I think now more than ever, we have more leverage than we've ever had, and we should use it wisely. So that's kind of my mixed bag of closing comments. Optimism, that's right.
Great.
I'll jump in. I hopefully that a lot of what's going on allows, as I said, kind of the idea to disarm the expectations and to really look at it from other people's point of views. You know, on one key point of optimism, people will come back out together, bars, commingling, all of this. What I'm hoping is that the operators that have put the names on the dotted lines, they're not flipping this over to the next generation, that they're able to hold out and really do this and be innovative, because we will come back out. But the key takeaway for me that I'm really trying to push more and more is that idea of the empathy around it. And so whether, as we talked about, with your perspective to your landlord, your team bringing them back, your guests walking in the door, it's kind of an overplayed term, and I think it's because people are glossing over it. Taking that moment to empathize this is a real opportunity for that we can come together with that. There's my optimistic moment.
Okay.
I think what I'd like to emphasize, I think there's a lot to be said for the collective wisdom of a group like this, but also I think as a city council or a restaurateur, you shouldn't just try to solve these problems by yourself. You should lean on your neighbors, your peer cities, your peer restaurants to see what's working for them and how they're solving it, because that may be a approach you hadn't considered before. So I think leaning on the collective wisdom of everyone in the situation is really something that's going to be a key to getting people through this, because a lot of times we've tended to operate on our own, but I think those right now it's essential that we lean on each other.
I agree with you, John, and Jason and Hunter, all of you. I mean, you know, I think there's a lot of coming together going on right now. And I think as long as we can keep and have those honest conversations, look at it from both sides, and, you know, I mean, almost like tackle it in a day-by-day situation, because there's just so much change and so much unknown. And I think if you sit there and try to figure out a long-term solution right now versus just focusing on getting through this unknown on a chunk-by-chunk basis, I just feel like both parties, it's just easier to kind of get through and just keep pivoting. I mean, right? Every day is a pivot. So kind of working together to pivot together and see how to overcome it.
Thank you, Deborah. And David?
I think just being flexible and being able to think outside the box and be open to new changes, and just realizing that the situation is not going away in a while. I am optimistic because I think there's a lot of opportunity if you do make it and do start new businesses that are in this new era of like delivery, to go, whatever it is, whether it be a cloud kitchen, consumer packaged goods, or markets. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and you just got to realize that things have changed and you got to be willing to change with them. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you all panelists for joining us today and contributing to, I think, a really meaningful conversation. Thank you everyone in the audience for being a part of this and being a part of the wonderful city of Beverly Hills and the Beverly Hills Chamber, and my appreciation to Nick and Todd and Blair and all the folks at the Beverly Hills Chamber and the folks at City Hall in the city of Beverly Hills for giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts and hopes for the industry. And with that, I toss it back to you, Nick.
Thank you again, Larry. We appreciate you. Like I said at the beginning, you always do such a great job getting panelists together that really know their industry and can provide a lot of value with their insights into it. Thank you again, panelists, for your participation today. I love the idea of collaboration and people getting together and trying to figure this out together, because it's not just like one group or one, even industry has all the answers. We really got to work together to figure this all out, because we're also interconnected with each other. So, and thank you to our participants for jumping on with us today. And we hope they got some valuable information from everybody, and everybody have a good rest of the day.
Great. Thank
And
you.
if you need anything, reach out to us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Larry.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Everybody. Bye-bye.